When Malcolm-Jamal Warner passed away in Costa Rica on July 21, 2025, his wife made a bold move that had Hollywood buzzing. She shut down all expectations with a private funeral. Only a select few got the invite, and that exclusive guest list said everything about Malcolm's real legacy.
The show is taken off the air. It's literally taking money out of my pocket.
Right.
So I got my own personal feelings about that because it personally affects me.
Ever since the Cosby show got yanked off the air, Malcolm never held back. He stayed speaking the truth, even when it slammed the brakes on his money flow.
They were tired of me fighting with the writers about their writing, and then they were tired of Eddie's shenanigans.
Which means
whatever. I mean, Eddie is a nut. And I mean that in
I imagine the brothers showing up late, the brothers showing
all
up
of that.
Whatever. And you're like, I'm on time.
Right. It was a miserable experience.
In his final years, Malcolm went all in on calling out the entertainment world's dirty laundry. And now his family's making sure that same industry doesn't flip his death into some fake tribute or money grab.
We're talking about not just Mr. Trump, but I think Mr. Trump's supporters, people who voted for him. I mean, you voted for misogyny and hate. There's no way around it.
He wasn't trying to make friends. He was making statements. Over the years, he clashed hard with former co-stars, took shots at big names in hip-hop, and stood by people others wouldn't touch, all of it costing him major checks.
I cannot listen to anymore because I love J. Cole, but I had to stop listening to J. Cole because I got tired of hearing and...
So when people noticed who didn't show up at that funeral, that was no accident. Those cuts were personal. The drama runs all the way back to 1996. Malcolm thought he was about to level up with a big comeback after the Cosby show, but Hollywood wasn't ready to give him a second shot. Adult roles didn't come easy, and he refused to play by their rules. UPN handed Malcolm his own sitcom, Malcolm and Eddie. Finally, he was the lead, but pairing him with Eddie Griffin turned out to be a lesson in who not to go to war with in Hollywood.
And even though we were at odds, what we both understood is we get to 100 episodes, we're going to have a sweet syndication deal. We were like, hey, however we feel about one another, we're going to get this money. We're going to get this 100 episodes.
See, the math was simple. 100 episodes meant syndication money for life. That's real financial security. Malcolm knew it. Griffin knew it. But staying focused, that's where things fell apart.
Ultimately, they cut us at 88. Because they were tired. They were tired of me fighting with the writers about their writing. And then they were tired of Eddie's shenanigans.
Which means
whatever. I mean, Eddie is a nut.
Malcolm was fighting tooth and nail behind the scenes, pushing the writers for real, honest black representation. Meanwhile, Griffin was rolling in late, unprepared, acting wild, and throwing off the whole production. It was chaos, and execs used it as the perfect excuse to start tweaking everything. The show flopped out at just 88 episodes. That's 12 short of the golden number. And just like that, both of them watched millions slip right through their fingers. But Malcolm walked away with more than just a loss. He gained clarity. Griffin, in his eyes, was the kind of black entertainer who didn't ruffle feathers. Unpredictable, yes, but never a real threat to the power structure. The execs liked that. Malcolm? He was sharp, professional, and refused to be disrespected, no matter the cost. That split between them got even louder years later. While Malcolm was dragging Trump loyalists and standing on principle, Griffin became the very type of celebrity Malcolm warned about. Loud, reckless, and eventually praising Trump on public platforms, making wild statements that fired up conservative fans. Karen Molina White, who was dating Malcolm during the Malcolm and Eddie days, later exposed how the network was scheming behind the scenes, trying to swap out black actors to make room for more white faces. Malcolm went to war for her, but Griffin's messy behavior gave the execs exactly what they needed to pull it off. That whole Malcolm and Eddie mess turned into Malcolm's personal playbook on who to trust and who to leave behind. From that moment on, he made one thing clear. Nobody else's selfishness was going to wreck his future again. That painful lesson stuck with him forever, and it even shaped the most personal choice of all, who didn't get an invite to his funeral. Malcolm never forgot how Griffin's recklessness cost him millions. That bridge burned on purpose. This wasn't just a one-time thing, it became a pattern. Malcolm never backed down from what he believed in, even when it cost him roles, cash, and connections. While the industry wanted him to play nice, smile wide, and stay thankful, he flipped the script, he got picky, and that same pickiness followed him right up to the day he died. The folks at UPN thought they could mold him into another child star they could control. They figured he'd just be grateful for any shot after the Cosby Show. But instead, they got a grown man who pushed back. Malcolm challenged their weak storylines, fought for fair treatment, and exposed their quiet racism. He wasn't loud about it, but behind the scenes, he was asking for black camera operators, calling out the writers for lazy stereotypes, and standing firm beside Karen Molina White. And for all that, they labeled him difficult. But Malcolm had figured it out early. If you don't fight for your values from day one, you'll end up giving them away little by little. Griffin taught him a lesson about who to let close. But Malcolm's real education in making powerful enemies, that came years later. By 2024, he had found his voice, and he used it to shake things up on his podcast, Not All Hood. What started off as honest talks about black identity on Malcolm's podcast quickly turned into an all-out war with some of hip-hop's biggest heavyweights in the crosshairs. Malcolm wasn't tiptoeing around industry drama anymore. He was naming names and calling folks out directly.
At this point, for me, in hip-hop, I think the word is, and should be the moratorium on both of those words in hip-hop, because it's low-lying fruit, it's so easy, everybody does it, to the point that it's corny.
This wasn't some vague rant about the music scene. Malcolm had a target, and it was one of the most respected rappers in the game, J. Cole.
There are MCs who I love, who I cannot listen to anymore because I love J. Cole, but I had to stop listening to J. Cole because I got tired of hearing and...
With millions of fans and deep industry pull, going after Cole wasn't just bold, it was straight up dangerous. But Malcolm wasn't backing down. He claimed the record labels were using hip-hop like a weapon, pushing harmful stereotypes, flooding the culture with self-hate, and making white executives filthy rich in the process. And he wasn't just speaking generally, he was saying artists like J. Cole were playing right into it. The fallout came fast and loud. Hip-hop fans lit up social media, blasting Malcolm as out of touch. Young rappers and listeners accused him of pushing outdated respectability politics, trying to police their art instead of understanding it. And Cole, he didn't even answer. In a culture where silence usually means dismissal, that quiet hit harder than any diss track. The message was clear. Malcolm wasn't even on the radar, but Malcolm knew what he was doing. Just like he clashed with Griffin back in the day or stood by Bill Cosby despite the storm, he was ready to lose everything if it meant staying true to what he believed. He thought artists had a duty to uplift their people, and certain lyrics were just too toxic, especially coming from someone as talented as Cole. This wasn't just a one-time rant. It was Malcolm's next evolution. He'd stopped avoiding messy people. Now, he was stepping to them head on and letting the chips fall where they may. Malcolm wasn't just stirring the pot, he was flipping the whole table. He went from critiquing culture to openly challenging entire industries and putting specific names on blast. His tolerance for playing nice, gone. And with that shift came a deep divide across black entertainment. Malcolm had become a voice for the older generation, those who believed in conscious messaging, community uplift, and purpose over popularity. But the younger wave of artists saw him differently. To them, his views felt like chains, limiting their freedom to express real life, raw and unfiltered. So when Malcolm passed, the silence from the hip-hop world was deafening. Artists he'd publicly criticized stayed quiet. No tributes, no posts, not even a word from J. Cole. The bridges Malcolm burned in life, they stayed burned in death. And when it came time for his funeral, that silence was reflected loud and clear. None of those hip-hop heavyweights were invited. Malcolm had chosen integrity over industry approval, and his family stood 10 toes down on that. His final goodbye wasn't about image, it was about values. His critiques on the podcast weren't just entertainment hot takes. He was exposing how black art had been hijacked, packaged, profited off, and controlled by white-owned corporations. He saw hip-hop being turned into a billion-dollar machine that often pumped destruction right back into the same communities it came from. Calling out artists like J. Cole wasn't about beef, It was about accountability. Malcolm believed if you had real talent and a huge platform, you had a responsibility to do better, not just for yourself, but for the people watching. The blowback he caught, that only proved his point. This industry protects profit, not truth, but Malcolm wasn't slowing down. His fight wasn't over. He was just getting warmed up. Malcolm's boldest and most expensive loyalty was still ahead. His shots at the music world had already made him plenty of enemies, but the real fallout came when he took a stand during the storm surrounding Bill Cosby. That decision would shape the rest of his career and decide who showed up to honor him after he was gone. Unlike his clashes with Eddie Griffin's chaos or his takedown of J. Cole's lyrics, this wasn't just about professionalism or music, it was personal. When the allegations against Cosby exploded, Malcolm had to pick a side. Protect his future or stay loyal to the man who gave him his break. He picked loyalty, and Hollywood never forgave him.
I am in no position to defend him because I can't.
Right.
But nor will I throw him under the bus.
Malcolm didn't defend the accusations, but he refused to throw Cosby under the bus either. He landed in a gray zone, calling out the industry's double standards without excusing anyone's behavior. But that middle ground satisfied no one. It alienated everyone.
You just look at just how the media is playing this whole thing out, and I can't help but think about Woody Allen, Roman Polanski, Stephen Collins. There's no one that has been calling for Woody's movies to be pulled off the air.
Right.
Malcolm pointed fingers at the hypocrisy, how Roman Polanski still got love at film festivals and Woody Allen's movies kept getting distribution, even with serious allegations on their names. But saying that put him directly at odds with the Me Too movement and survivor advocates. To Hollywood execs, he became a liability, someone who wouldn't stick to a safe narrative. The punishment came fast and hard. When the Cosby Show reruns were pulled in 2014, Malcolm's residuals vanished. He lost millions he was counting on for retirement, and he was honest about it. Supporting Cosby didn't just cost him favor, it drained his bank account. Still, he stood firm. He wasn't trying to win a popularity contest. Malcolm knew exactly what he was risking, and he chose principle over comfort, even when it meant sacrificing everything he'd worked for. Malcolm's honesty came off as cold to some, especially to those who believe moral lines should always come before money. But in 2023, just 2 years before he passed, Malcolm looked back on everything they'd lost in the Cosby fallout. A reboot of The Cosby Show could have set the whole cast up for life, but Cosby's crimes made that dream vanish for good. Still, Malcolm never once said he regretted standing by him. He knew the cost, lost gigs, lost friendships, and millions gone. But he stood tall, because for him, loyalty and fairness came before everything. It wasn't about defending actions. It was about defending values, personal ties, due process, and the right to think beyond headlines. That loyalty to Cosby wasn't some random decision. It tied back to everything Malcolm had always stood for. Just like he fought to keep Karen Molina White from being pushed out when execs wanted to lighten the cast, just like he called out hip-hop stars who sold out for clout. Over and over, Malcolm chose his principles.
3 months ago, what we talked about was something he was very proud of. He had done a concert in Minnesota.
Even when it meant torching his own career. When Malcolm died, Cosby himself confirmed they'd stayed close. He revealed they'd spoken just 3 months before Malcolm passed, about a concert no less. Malcolm stayed proud of that connection. Even with the world watching and judging, he never turned his back on his mentor, not even when it would have been way safer to do so. But this was bigger than Cosby. Malcolm's stand wasn't really about one man. It was about refusing to let public outrage erase nuance and truth. He saw how fast Hollywood turned on people when it suited their image. The same execs who made fortunes off The Cosby Show suddenly acted like they never knew Cosby at all. Malcolm wasn't trying to be liked. He was trying to stay real. And if that meant being the outcast, so be it. Malcolm saw right through the fake smiles and double standards, and he refused to play along, even though staying quiet could have saved his career. That silence might have meant more roles, more friendships, and way more money. But Malcolm didn't care. He'd already decided his integrity was worth more than a padded bank account. Every clash, every burnt bridge taught him something new about how the game really worked. Hollywood didn't want honest voices. It wanted performers who smiled, nodded, and never questioned the system. But Malcolm, he became everything they didn't want. Loyal to his people, unapologetically complex, and never afraid to push back on the narrative. He wasn't interested in watered-down truths or fake unity. Over time, all those battles with Griffin, J. Cole, even Cosby weren't just random blow-ups. They were training grounds. Malcolm was gearing up for something bigger, a total rejection of Hollywood's demand for political silence. Supporting Cosby despite the fallout had shown Malcolm just how costly truth could be, but it also taught him where he stood. And by 2024, he was done playing it safe.
We're talking about not just Mr. Trump, but I think Mr. Trump's supporters, people who voted for him. You voted for misogyny and hate. There's no way around it.
He wasn't just poking at Trump supporters, he was dragging them. Celebrities, producers, executives, if they backed Trump and tried to keep a foot in Hollywood's liberal scene, Malcolm aired them out without hesitation. And he didn't sugarcoat or spin it cute. Malcolm was calling them out by name.
I think I have more hope for what the wake-up call does to our country. I mean, the reality is, the pro-Trump supporters are a voice that had not been heard.
No matter how powerful they were, no more industry diplomacy, no more keeping the peace. For Malcolm, it was loyalty to truth or nothing at all. This wasn't your typical Hollywood activism. No vague posts about unity or playing both sides. Malcolm drew a bold line in the sand. He said flat out, if you support Trump, that says something real about your character, period. But that kind of raw honesty doesn't fly in an industry built on keeping things neutral and market-friendly. Studios want stars who smile for everyone, keep it light, and never rock the boat enough to scare off sponsors. Malcolm, he did the exact opposite. He made himself a threat to the whole system. To the executives playing it safe, Malcolm became too risky, someone who could stir up real controversy and cost them. But to anyone really paying attention, his political stance made perfect sense. It wasn't a random switch-up. It was the final form of a pattern he'd been living for decades. He learned from Eddie Griffin that some folks just aren't built like him. No shared values, no shared vision. From J. Cole, he realized speaking the truth might isolate you, but it also gives you clarity. And from standing by Cosby, Malcolm learned the price of loyalty when the whole world's watching. But to him, sticking to your code was everything. His podcast became his microphone for raw, uncomfortable truth. He talked systemic racism, industry exploitation, and called out black celebrities who stayed silent just to keep their gigs. He didn't whisper, he named names, and it cost him. Fewer roles, blacklisted from major projects, watching less talented, more agreeable faces get the shine. But through all that noise, Malcolm found something real, peace. He married someone who loved the real him. He left the Hollywood chaos behind and moved to Atlanta to raise his daughter in peace. That wasn't retreat, that was Malcolm winning his way. Everything from Eddie to Cosby had been leading here. His politics weren't a pivot. They were the final stage in a life built on unshakable values. Malcolm had gone through it all, ducking messy co-stars, calling out toxic artists, standing by controversial figures, and finally rejecting the whole system that had owned him since he was a kid. The little boy who stole America's heart as Theo Huxtable grew into a man that Hollywood couldn't buy, couldn't bully, and definitely couldn't silence. That kind of independence, it came with a price. In the same business that made him a star, Malcolm had more enemies than allies by the end. And when he passed, the silence from certain corners of Hollywood said everything. The producers he called out, the celebs he dragged, the execs he exposed, they all stayed quiet and they all knew better than to show up at his funeral. Malcolm's family made sure of that. If you didn't stand by him in life, you weren't about to fake it in death. His political awakening wasn't sudden. It was built over years of conflict and disappointment. Malcolm had seen how deals were really made, how careers got buried for speaking out, and how morals got traded for profits like poker chips. And when he started talking about it publicly, that made him dangerous to the people who relied on silence to keep their power. He called out the stars who stayed quiet through Trump's presidency just to protect their brands. He exposed execs who got rich off harmful content while pretending to push diversity. Malcolm's views weren't just about politics, they were about character, and he wasn't afraid to say who had it and who didn't. So when word dropped that his funeral would be private, with a tightly controlled guest list, the message was clear. This wasn't just a goodbye, it was a final truth bomb. Who got invited? That told you who was real and who didn't. That exposed everything fake about how Hollywood really plays the game. The same folks who pushed Malcolm to the sidelines for years suddenly wanted to be front and center, mourning him for the cameras. But his wife, she wasn't having it. She had stood by Malcolm as he made bold, unpopular choices, watching him lose friends, roles, and millions for staying true to his beliefs. There was no way she was about to let Hollywood twist his death into some phony redemption arc. When the tributes poured in on social media, the truth came out fast. The real one stood up. Raven Simone, who grew up with Malcolm on The Cosby Show, shared raw emotional memories. Tracy Ellis Ross, his co-star from Read Between the Lines, posted a heartfelt tribute that actually meant something. These weren't PR posts or fake sympathy. These were people who really knew him, who stayed close even when Malcolm's opinions made headlines. Even Bill Cosby, toxic as his name had become in Hollywood, felt no fear speaking up about Malcolm's passing. Their bond had stayed real through every controversy, and Cosby knew Malcolm had never abandoned him. That said it all. But the silence, that was just as loud. None of the hip-hop artists Malcolm had challenged stepped forward. Not a word from J. Cole, even though he'd been name-checked directly on the podcast. No posts, no statements, just quiet. And the execs who blackballed Malcolm over his politics, nowhere to be seen. Eddie Griffin, despite putting up a tribute online, wasn't getting through the doors. His messiness had cost Malcolm millions and proven exactly why Malcolm had drawn that line in the first place. The funeral made the divisions clear, without a single press release or drama-filled statement. The room was full of family, real friends, and true collaborators. That was it. No seat for opportunists, no stage for fake tears. One of Malcolm's cousins put it best, reminding everyone that his mom had raised him to be more than just a celebrity. His legacy wasn't about fame, it was about truth, loyalty, and standing for something, even when it meant standing alone. Malcolm's funeral wasn't about Hollywood fame or saving face, it was about honoring the real man behind the spotlight, the man who fought for what he believed in, even when it cost him everything. The guest list? It traced a straight line back to every battle Malcolm ever fought. Eddie Griffin's sloppy behavior? Locked out? J. Cole's silence after being called out? Not welcome. The executives who punished Malcolm for standing by Cosby? Left on red? The celebrities who flipped on him over his political stances? Nowhere in sight. Malcolm had spent his final year saying what truly made him proud wasn't the shows, the fame, or the checks. It was the fact that he kept his integrity even when the price was steep. He found peace in knowing he never sold out. His family's choices for the funeral spoke loud and clear. They weren't there to prop up a brand or play into industry politics. They were there to celebrate a father, a husband, an artist, a man who walked away from deals, roles, and opportunities just to protect his soul. He picked loyalty over clout, truth over comfort. And the funeral? It was his final act of resistance against a system built on fake smiles and backroom deals. His loved ones chose realness over reach. They didn't want the industry vultures. They wanted the ones who'd stood by Malcolm even when it wasn't convenient. Malcolm had spent a lifetime choosing to be himself instead of who Hollywood wanted him to be. And now, that same machine that tried to own him for 40 years was left standing at the gate. The kid who once made America laugh as Theo Huxtable had grown into a man that couldn't be bought, bullied, or shut down. His guest list said it all. Some relationships survived storms. The rest exposed as fake when the cameras stopped rolling. Eddie Griffin, J. Cole, and all the others learned too late. Malcolm didn't hand out loyalty for status. It had to be earned through real respect. And if you didn't have that, you were watching from outside. Malcolm's funeral wasn't just a ceremony, it was a statement. Planned with care by his wife and close family, it was built to protect everything he stood for. They knew exactly what would happen after his death. People who had ignored him for years, distanced themselves when things got controversial, or stayed quiet when he needed support, would suddenly want in. They'd want to attach themselves to his legacy like they'd been there all along. But his family wasn't fooled. That guest list wasn't just about who could enter. It was about honoring the real Malcolm, the man who made hard choices, turned down easy money, and stood firm on values, no matter the cost. He taught them something deep. Some relationships are worth keeping, even when the world turns on you. Others, they expose themselves when things get tough. The funeral became the final filter, one last chance to show who was real and who had just been using him. And his family wasn't about to let his name be exploited by the same industry folks who tried to silence him when he was breathing. They protected his legacy the way he lived his life, with truth, loyalty, and no compromises. That's the end of today's video. If you felt this, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your thoughts. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear it. We've got more deep dives coming soon, so hit that notification bell and see you on the next one.